My mother-in-law tried to force me to change my career path. What I did to protect my dreams left her speechless. "You're too smart to waste your life on charity work," she said, passing me the mashed potatoes like it wasn't a threat. The words hung in the air like smoke, polluting the otherwise pristine dining room. Even the crystal chandelier above seemed to dim slightly at Diane's remark. I accepted the porcelain bowl with a practiced smile, one I'd perfected over the 3 years since marrying her son. "Thank you for your concern, Diane," I replied, spooning a modest portion onto my plate. "But I wouldn't call it wasting my life. Those kids need someone who understands them." Diane Harrington adjusted her pearl necklace, a nervous habit she displayed whenever someone challenged her. At 58, she maintained the sharp edges of her youth-tailored clothes, precision-cut silver bob, and opinions honed like knives. Her husband, Robert, sank deeper into his chair, suddenly fascinated by the grain of the mahogany table. "Of course they do, Maya," she said with practiced sympathy. "But someone with your education could be running a private practice by now, or consulting for corporations on their wellness programs. That's where the real impact happens." Ethan, my husband, cleared his throat. I could feel his discomfort radiating across the table as he reached for his wine glass. He took a long sip before intervening. "Mom, we've talked about this. Maya loves her work at the clinic. I'm just being practical," Diane replied, cutting into her roast beef with surgical precision. "The Eastside Community Mental Health Clinic isn't even in a safe neighborhood. Wasn't there another shooting just 2 blocks from there last month?" I bit the inside of my cheek. The shooting had been a car backfiring, but the subsequent police response had triggered several of my teenage clients with PTSD. I'd spent that afternoon talking one of them down from a panic attack, holding his trembling hands as he remembered watching his brother die in a drive-by 3 years earlier. "The neighborhood is precisely why the clinic needs to be there," I said, keeping my voice level. "These kids don't have access to the kind of resources your clients' children do." Diane smiled, that country club smile that never quite reached her eyes. "That's very noble, dear. But nobility doesn't fund retirement accounts." Before I could respond, Ethan jumped in again. "Maya's making a difference, Mom. That's what matters to her." The way he said it, like he was explaining a child's charming but impractical dream, made something twist in my stomach. I studied my husband's face, noting the slight apologetic shrug he offered his mother. 3 years ago, when we'd met at a friend's gallery opening, Ethan had marveled at my dedication to community mental health. "That's incredible," he'd said then. "You're actually changing lives." When had his admiration morphed into tolerance? Robert finally looked up from his plate. "The potatoes are excellent, Diane," he said, his standard peace offering whenever tension arose. Diane nodded graciously at her husband, as if he'd made a profound observation. "Maya, tell me about that conference you're attending next month," Robert continued, his kind eyes meeting mine. "The one in Chicago?" I appreciated his effort. Unlike his wife, Robert had always shown genuine interest in my work, even donating anonymously to the clinic's art therapy program last Christmas. "It's on trauma-informed approaches for adolescents," I explained, grateful for the subject change. "I'm presenting a case study on group therapy methods we've developed for teens affected by community violence." "How fascinating," Diane said, in a tone suggesting it was anything but. "Will there be any potential connections there? People who might offer you something more substantial?" I set my fork down carefully. "The clinic is substantial, Diane. We served over 300 at-risk teens last year alone. And how many of those kids will actually break the cycle?" she asked, her head tilting with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. "Statistically speaking, of course." The question hit like a slap. Not because I hadn't heard it before. Funders asked variations of it constantly, but because I knew what lurked beneath the surface. To Diane, these weren't real people with complex lives and traumas. They were statistics, problems to be managed, preferably from a safe distance. 37 of our graduates are now in college," I replied. 14 work full-time, in stable jobs. 22 have mentorship roles in our peer support program. I didn't mention the 4 we'd lost to violence, or the 6 who disappeared back into troubled homes. Those losses kept me awake at night, wondering what more I could have done. "That's impressive," Robert said warmly. Diane nodded. "It certainly is, though imagine what Maya could do with proper resources behind her." Ethan reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I've been saying something similar, actually. Maya, tell them about that private practice option Dr. Hernandez mentioned. The betrayal felt like ice water in my veins. We discussed this once, in passing, after bumping into my former professor at a fundraiser. Dr. Hernandez had mentioned an opening at her upscale practice in Cambridge. I'd politely declined, explaining that my community work was my passion. I pulled my hand away gently. That's not something I'm pursuing. But you should consider it, Ethan continued, oblivious to my discomfort. The hours would be better. The pay would definitely be better. He laughed, a sound that suddenly felt foreign. And you wouldn't have to worry about the building's heat failing midwinter. Is that happening at your clinic? Robert asked, concerned. It happened last January, I replied. We made it work. Space heaters and extra blankets. The kids still came. Because they had nowhere else to go, Diane observed, as if this proved her point. Wouldn't it be better to create sustainable solutions rather than band-aids? I looked at her across the gleaming table, surrounded by art pieces she'd collected from emerging markets and furniture that cost more than my annual salary. Everything in this house was calculated, from the strategic dinner invitations to the carefully calibrated wine pairings. Nothing was left to chance or compassion. The clinic isn't a band-aid, I said quietly. For many of these kids, it's the first place they've ever felt safe enough to speak about their trauma. It's the first time they've had an adult believe them. Diane's expression softened fractionally. I understand that, Maya. I really do. But you could help set up programs like that while still having a career that matches your potential. She glanced at Ethan. Tell her about what Jeremy's wife is doing. What's her name again? Sophia, Ethan supplied. She was a social worker at Boston Children's, but now she consults for healthcare startups. She's developing mental health apps for teens that could reach thousands, not just the few hundred at one clinic. The way he said it, the few hundred, made my blood simmer. Those few hundred had names, stories, trauma, and resilience that no app could fully address. They needed human connection, not algorithms. Maybe she could connect you with some opportunities, Diane continued, pressing the advantage. Help you scale up your impact. Scale up, as if compassion were a business model waiting for venture capital. I looked at my half-eaten dinner, suddenly losing my appetite. I appreciate the thought, I said finally, folding my napkin. But I believe in direct service. I believe in showing up, consistently, for people who've had too many adults disappoint them. Diane's smile tightened. Well, nobility runs in your family, I suppose. The reference to my mother, a single parent who'd worked 3 jobs to put me through college after my father abandoned us, wasn't lost on me. Diane had always viewed my background as quaint, even inspirational in an abstract way, but ultimately, as something I should have transcended by now. Yes, I agreed, meeting her gaze directly. It does. As the conversation shifted to Robert's golf game and Ethan's latest work project, I felt the familiar weight of being an outsider in this family. Not because of where I came from, but because of where I chose to remain, with one foot in their world of privilege and the other firmly planted in the community that had shaped me. What worried me most, though, was the growing sense that Ethan was drifting toward his mother's view of success. When we'd met, he'd been attracted to my passion, my difference from the women in his social circle. Now he seemed determined to help me improve myself right out of the person he'd fallen in love with. I didn't yet know that Diane's comments over dinner were more than just opinions. I didn't know she was actively working to undermine everything I'd built. But as I watched her refill wine glasses with practiced grace, something in her satisfied expression sent a warning chill down my spine. I thought she disapproved. I didn't know she was actively sabotaging me. The first sign came on a Tuesday morning in March. I arrived at the clinic to find Lena, our administrative director, staring blankly at her computer screen. The Woodley Foundation rejected our grant application, she said, without looking up. We were practically guaranteed that funding. I set my coffee down, the liquid sloshing over the rim. The Woodley Foundation grant would have funded our trauma therapy program for the next 3 years. New staff, better resources, expanded hours. We'd spent months on that application. Did they say why? I asked, scanning the rejection email over Lena's shoulder. Just the usual, highly competitive process and unfortunately unable to fund at this time. Lena swiveled in her chair. Maya, we needed that money. The city grant is our only other option, and that decision is next week. I squeezed her shoulder. We'll figure it out. Let me make some calls. But my calls went nowhere. Former classmates at the foundation couldn't give specifics. My mentor from grad school expressed surprise but had no insights. By Friday, the rejections still made no sense. The Woodley Foundation had practically courted us to apply. Then the city grant fell through too. I don't understand, I told Ethan that night, pacing our kitchen. Our application was solid. The evaluation committee visited last month and said our team crisis intervention program was exactly what they wanted to fund. Ethan looked uncomfortable, his attention fixed on the pasta he was stirring. Funding is competitive, Maya. Maybe someone had better metrics or connections. That's just it. We had the connections. Commissioner Garcia's son went through our program. He told me personally we were top of the list. Things change, Ethan said vaguely. Something in his tone made me stop pacing. Do you know something about this? He turned, his face too carefully neutral. Why would I know anything about city grants? Because your mother sits on half the boards in this city, I said slowly. Did she mention Engine? Ethan sighed. Mom doesn't talk to me about her committee work. You know that. But there was something there. A flicker of discomfort I couldn't ignore. The next morning, I called Jessica Wu, a former client who now worked for the city council. We'd stayed in touch over the years, and she'd always been grateful for how the clinic had helped her through her parents' violent divorce. I'm not supposed to share internal communications, Jessica said hesitantly when I asked about our grant rejection. But given what you did for me, she paused. Check your email in 5 minutes. The forwarded memo came with no message, just the subject line, FYI. My hands trembled as I read it. It was an advisory note to the grant committee from an external consultant, Diane Harrington. My mother-in-law had grave concerns about the fiscal responsibility and operational oversight at Eastside Community Mental Health Clinic. She cited unvetted leadership and inadequate safeguards for vulnerable youth. She has specifically named me as a risk factor, suggesting I lacked the experience to manage significant funding. She'd framed it as protecting taxpayer money, as civic responsibility. The date on the memo was 2 days after our last family dinner. My vision blurred. I read it 3 more times, each reading stoking a fire that started in my stomach and rose to my throat. All those dinner conversations about scaling up and real impact hadn't been well-meaning advice. They'd been reconnaissance. I called Ethan immediately. Did you know? I demanded when he answered. Know what? His voice had that careful neutrality again. That your mother has been actively blocking our funding. Not just the city grant, I bet she got to Woodley too. The silence that followed was all the confirmation I needed. Maya? She's just concerned about... Don't... I cut him off. Don't you dare defend this. I hung up and stared at the memo again. Diane had leveraged her reputation, her connections, her veneer of civic responsibility to cut the legs out from under our clinic, to cut my legs out from under me. For what? To force me into a career path she found more acceptable? To prove her point that community mental health wasn't viable? Or simply because she couldn't stand that I'd chosen a path so different from hers? I printed the memo and locked it in my desk drawer. My phone buzzed repeatedly with text from Ethan, but I ignored them all. That evening, I stayed late at the clinic, watching as our teens filtered in for evening group therapy. Zoe, with her purple hair and self-harm scars now fading to silver. Marcus, who'd stopped sleeping in abandoned buildings and now had a part-time job. Destiny, whose poetry about her mother's addiction had won a citywide contest. These kids were more than statistics or bullet points in a grant application. They were survivors, fighters, and so was I. I thought of Diane in her tailored suits and tasteful jewelry, making phone calls and crafting carefully worded memos. She thought she was protecting her son from a mismatched marriage, protecting her social standing from a daughter-in-law who didn't fit the mold, protecting me from my own choices. But as I watched Zoe help a newer girl work through a panic attack with techniques we'd practiced for months, I knew with absolute clarity that Diane had miscalculated. She thought I would crumble without institutional support. She thought I would come crawling back, admit defeat, and take some corporate wellness job that she could brag about at her country club. She didn't know who she was dealing with. I opened my laptop and created a new folder called Strategy. Inside, I started a document listing every board member, every potential funder, every press contact in the city. Then I added a second document, Voices Unheard Initiative. This wasn't just about saving my clinic anymore. This was about showing Diane Harrington exactly what happened when you underestimated someone like me. I didn't confront her, not yet. First, I would build something she couldn't tear down with a memo. Something that would force her to see me, really see me, for the first time. As I typed long into the night, I felt a strange calm replace my anger. Diane had money, connections, and influence. But I had something she'd never understand. The absolute clarity of purpose that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're fighting for. If she wanted a polished, powerful daughter-in-law, I'd give her one, on my own terms. For 3 days after discovering Diane's betrayal, I barely spoke to Ethan. He tried everything. Apologetic texts, flowers delivered to my office, even showing up at the clinic with lunch. I accepted the food for my staff, but sent him away. She thought she was helping, he'd said, standing awkwardly in our clinic's waiting room. You know how she gets when she thinks she has the solution. This wasn't helping, Ethan. This was sabotage, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the teenagers watching us curiously from the rec room. And you knew. He looked down at his expensive loafers. I suspected. I didn't know for certain. But you didn't warn me. I didn't think she'd actually. He stopped, reconsidering. I should have said something. I'm sorry. I studied my husband's face, the genuine remorse in his eyes, the tension in his jaw. He was caught between two worlds, just as I was. But unlike me, he hadn't chosen his position. He'd been born into it, shaped by it, unable to see beyond its boundaries. I need time, I told him, but right now, I have work to do. That night, I didn't go home. Instead, I called my oldest friend, Renata, who'd been by my side since we shared a decrepit apartment in grad school. You can crash here as long as you need, she said, pulling out her couch bed. But what's your next move? I unfolded my laptop. Watch this. Over pizza and too much coffee, I outlined the Voices Unheard Initiative, a grassroots mental health program that would operate outside the traditional funding structures. No boards to please, no committees to convince, no Diane Harringtons to navigate around. We start small, I explained, sketching on Renata's whiteboard. Direct service in local community centers, churches, even coffee shops if needed. Trauma-informed care that meets people where they are. With what money? Renata asked. Practical as always. Microgrants, crowdfunding, my savings, at least to start. I tapped my pen against the board. I've got vacation time saved up. I can run this parallel to my clinic work. And the people? You can't do this alone. I've got interns from my old graduate program begging for real-world experience. 3 colleagues who are as frustrated with the system as I am. And you, if you're in. Renata, who taught psychology at the community college, grinned. You know I'm in, but Maya, this is personal for you. Are you sure you're thinking clearly? I stopped drawing and faced her. It's absolutely personal, but that doesn't make it wrong. The next day, I returned home. Ethan was sitting at our kitchen table, dark circles under his eyes. He looked up when I walked in, visibly relieved. I thought maybe you weren't coming back, he said quietly. I'm not giving up on us that easily, I replied, setting my bag down. But I need to know where you stand, Ethan. Not between me and your mother, between right and wrong. He rubbed his face. It's not that simple. Actually, it is. Your mother deliberately sabotaged work that helps vulnerable kids because it didn't align with her vision for my career. That's wrong. I know, he admitted. I've never stood up to her. Not really. You don't have to, I said, surprising both of us. I'm not asking you to fight with your mother. I'm asking you to support me while I do what I need to do. Confusion crossed his face. What are you planning? I smiled. Something she'd actually approve of, if she knew it was coming from anyone but me. Over the next 2 weeks, Voices Unheard took shape. I secured a small microgrant from a local business association. Renata volunteered her classroom after hours. 4 graduate interns signed on for practical experience. We borrowed folding chairs, printed flyers on donated paper, and created a simple website. Our first session was held in the basement of a public library in Eastside. We expected maybe a dozen teens. 30 showed up. How did you find so many kids so quickly? asked Julian, one of my clinic colleagues who joined the initiative. They were always there, I said, watching them settle into our circle. They just needed someone to ask the right questions. The Voices Unheard methodology was revolutionary in its simplicity. We created safe spaces where teens could process trauma through guided peer support. No clinical settings, no stigma, no barriers. Just trained facilitators and evidence-based practices delivered in everyday spaces. I worked 14-hour days, splitting time between the clinic and Voices Unheard. Ethan watched with a mixture of concern and growing admiration. "You're taking this too personally," he said one night, "finding me working at 2 a.m. Mom's not worth burning yourself out over." I looked up from my laptop. This stopped being about your mother the moment those 30 kids showed up. This is about them now. But that wasn't entirely true. Every proposal I drafted, every media pitch I sent, every community partnership I forged, I imagined Diane's face when she finally saw what I was building, when she realized the charity work she dismissed had become something powerful. By month 3, we had 5 meeting locations and over 100 regular participants. Local teachers started referring students. A neighborhood church donated space and supplies. 2 small newspapers ran stories about our work. Through it all, Ethan remained cautiously supportive. He didn't fully understand why I wouldn't just apply for new institutional grants, why I was building something from scratch when I could work within the system. He still thought I was making things harder than they needed to be. "I'm not burning bridges," I explained during a rare quiet dinner together. "I'm building new paths." The real test came at Sunday dinner with his parents. Diane greeted me with her usual practiced warmth, as if she hadn't systematically undermined my life's work. "Maya, darling, you look tired," she said, analyzing me over her wine glass. "Everything all right at the clinic?" The slight pause before clinic carried all her disdain. "Actually," I replied, butterknife smooth, "I've been developing a new initiative, trauma-informed care in non-traditional settings." "How innovative," she said, clearly expecting something small and quaint. "We're calling it Voices Unheard," I continued. "We've already got 5 locations and community partnerships with 3 schools." For just a moment, Diane's mask slipped. She hadn't expected me to build something new. She'd expected me to flounder, to come begging for her connections and guidance. "Fascinating," she recovered quickly. "And the funding model?" "Grassroots," I replied with a smile. "Very independent." As I described our work, I watched her reassess me in real time. The daughter-in-law she thought she could mold was revealing herself to be something unexpected, someone who could build without her permission or resources. And that was just the beginning. The press didn't need to know who I was married to. They only needed to hear the truth. It started with a phone call on a rainy Tuesday in October, 6 months after launching Voices Unheard. "Is this Maya Harrington?" asked an unfamiliar voice. I almost corrected her. I'd kept my maiden name, Alvarez, but something stopped me. "Yes, this is Maya. Cynthia Wong from the Boston Globe. I'm working on a feature about grassroots mental health initiatives. Your name keeps coming up." I gripped the phone tighter. From teachers, community organizers, a few parents, and very enthusiastically from some teenagers who said, "You're the only adult who's ever really listened to them." My throat tightened. "They said that?" "They did. I'd like to interview you and possibly some of your program participants. With appropriate permissions, of course." I scheduled the interview for the following week, then sat at my desk, hands trembling slightly. The Boston Globe wasn't just any local paper, it was the paper of record for the city. The one Diane had delivered each morning with her coffee, the one that covered charity galas and profiled the city's power players. When I told Ethan that night, his reaction surprised me. "That's incredible, Maya." His eyes lit up with genuine pride. "The Globe doesn't cover just anything." "I know," I said, studying him. "Your mother reads it religiously." A shadow crossed his face. "You're still keeping score with her, aren't you?" "This isn't about keeping score," I replied, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. "This is about visibility for work that matters." The interview took place at our newest location, a converted warehouse space donated by a local business owner whose niece had joined our program. Cynthia Wong watched a session in progress, then spoke with me and several teens who had volunteered to share their stories. Marcus, now 19 and working while taking community college classes, spoke about how traditional therapy had failed him, but Voices Unheard had saved his life. "Miss Maya doesn't talk at us," he explained. "She built a place where we talk at each other, with people who actually get it." Zoe, her purple hair now blue, described our emergency text line that had stopped 3 attempts in the past month alone. "Nobody else was there at 3 a.m., she said simply. Voices Unheard was. I didn't realize Cynthia was also interviewing others until I saw the final article 2 weeks later. Voices Unheard, the grassroots revolution in teen mental health, crawled across the front page of the Sunday Metro section. My photo, not in a clinical setting, but sitting cross-legged in a circle with teens, was prominently featured. The article detailed how Voices Unheard had expanded to 7 locations, serving over 200 teens, highlighting our innovative peer support model and trauma-informed approach. It included statistics on improved school attendance, reduced self-harm incidents, and testimonials from teachers and parents. But what made my hands shake was the sidebar. After the city's decision not to fund established mental health services earlier this year, Voices Unheard emerged to fill critical gaps, demonstrating that sometimes innovation thrives outside institutional walls, Cynthia had written. She hadn't explicitly connected Diane to the funding decisions, but anyone familiar with the city's grant committees would know who had been involved. My phone exploded with messages. Colleagues, friends, former professors. A local news station wanted a TV interview. A podcast about urban issues requested my participation. Most surprisingly, private donors began reaching out, including to the clinic. People who had read the article and wanted to support both Voices Unheard and the established work at Eastside Community Mental Health Clinic. "I don't understand," Lena said, bursting into my office waving a check. "The Reynolds Foundation just called. They want to fund our trauma program, the same one rejected 6 months ago." I smiled. "Send them our updated proposal." 3 days after the article, Councilwoman Irene Jackson called. "We're holding public hearings on youth mental health services," she explained. "After reading about your work, I'd like you to testify." About Voices Unheard? About the whole picture, the institutional barriers, the funding gaps, and your innovative solutions. The council needs to hear from someone on the front lines. I agreed immediately, then called Ethan. "City Council wants me to testify at their public health hearings," I told him. "Maya, that's..." He sounded genuinely impressed. "That's a big deal." "I know," I said. "I'm going to tell the whole story." A pause. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means I'm going to talk about how established programs lost funding and why grassroots initiatives had to fill the gap." Another longer pause. "Are you going to name names?" "I'm going to speak truth to power," I said carefully, like a professional would. The morning of the hearing, a text from Diane appeared on my phone. "Saw you're speaking at City Council today. Represent the family well." The presumption that I would be speaking as a Harrington, not as Maya Alvarez, that I should consider her reputation in my testimony, was so perfectly Diane that I almost laughed. At the hearing, I spoke for 15 minutes about the mental health crisis facing our city's teens and the systemic barriers to addressing it. I didn't name Diane directly, but I described how funding decisions were often made by those with limited understanding of community needs. "When institutional doors close," I concluded, "we don't give up on these kids. We find windows, we build new doors, we create paths where none existed." The testimony was live-streamed and later featured on local news. By evening, schools were calling to request training programs for their staff. 3 more community spaces offered to host Voices Unheard sessions. That Sunday, we attended dinner at the Harrington House as usual. Diane greeted me with her perfect hostess style, but something had changed in her eyes, a careful reassessment. "Your article in the Globe was quite something," she said, serving me first for once. "Very impactful." "Thank you," I replied simply. "I hear you've been asked to speak at Westbrook Academy next month." That's Elise Fenway's territory. She never allows outsiders to address her students. The fact that Diane knew this, that she was tracking my new connections, told me everything. "Yes," I confirmed. "They're implementing our peer support model." For just a moment, I saw it. The twitch in her professionally maintained smile. The realization that I hadn't just survived her attempt to sideline me. I had transformed it into something more powerful than she'd imagined possible. And everyone in her world was starting to notice. She didn't know the keynote speaker was me. That made it even better. The invitation arrived in thick cream cardstock, embossed with gold lettering. Harrington, Winners and Associates cordially invites you to the annual Urban Wellness Benefit Gala. Ethan tossed it on our kitchen counter. Mom's firm does this every year, usually boring speeches and rubber chicken. We can skip if you want. I picked up the invitation, examining the details. The gala would benefit several approved urban wellness initiatives. Diane chaired the selection committee, naturally. Actually, I said, I think we should attend. Ethan looked surprised. Really? You hate these things? I'm developing a new appreciation for them, I replied with a smile that made him raise an eyebrow. What Ethan didn't know, what Diane certainly didn't know, was that Patricia Winters, the other named partner at the law firm, had a grandson in our Voices Unheard program. Jonah had been spiraling after his parents' messy divorce until he found our Thursday night group. Patricia had called me personally the week before. The work you're doing, she'd said, her lawyer's precision momentarily softened by emotion. It gave me my grandson back. When she asked me to speak at their annual gala, I'd agreed instantly. Patricia had handled everything, keeping my name off the printed programs at my request. Just list me as special guest speaker from Voices Unheard, I'd suggested. Diane would never expect me to choose a speaker without consulting her. Patricia had confided with surprising candor. But it's my turn to select, and frankly, her choices in past years have been quite self-serving. The night of the gala, I wore a black dress that Diane had once described as too ambitious for a therapist. When I'd worn it to a family wedding, its sleek lines and subtle sheen whispered power rather than screamed it. Exactly the language Diane herself spoke. You look incredible, Ethan said as we arrived at the downtown hotel. But you seem different tonight. I squeezed his hand. Good different or bad different? Good, he decided. Confident. Like you know something no one else does. I smiled. Maybe I do. The ballroom glittered with Boston's elite old money, new tech, lay aspirants, and the frappantly philanthropic. Diane held court near the entrance, stunning in midnight blue, greeting guests with practiced charm. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw me.
Maya, darling, that dress is quite striking on you.
Thank you, Diane, I replied. I thought I'd make an effort for such an important event. Well, you certainly have. Her gaze flicked to Ethan. Your father's already at our table. Front and center, as usual. Throughout dinner, Diane introduced me to various guests, her tone suggesting I was a charming curiosity. This is my daughter-in-law, Maya. She does wonderful work with troubled teens. Each time, I corrected her gently. Trauma-informed mental health intervention, actually. Through both the Eastside Clinic and our Voices Unheard initiative. By the third introduction, Diane's smile had tightened. By the fifth, she stopped making introductions altogether. After dessert, Patricia Winters approached the podium, elegant in her 70s. She commanded immediate respect. Tonight's topic, urban wellness, means different things to different people, she began. For some, it's about beautiful parks and clean streets. For others, it's about physical health initiatives. She paused, scanning the room. But for me, it's become intensely personal. True wellness must include mental health, particularly for our young people struggling with trauma, anxiety, and hopelessness. Diane nodded approvingly from our table, clearly expecting the usual platitudes. Which is why I'm so pleased to introduce tonight's keynote speaker, Patricia continued. Someone whose innovative approach is transforming mental health access across our city, the founder of Voices Unheard. Please welcome Maya Alvarez. The shock on Diane's face was worth every late night, every grant rejection, every dismissive comment I didn't. Her champagne glass froze halfway to her lips as I stood and made my way to the podium. Robert gave me an encouraging nod. Ethan looked stunned but broke into a genuine smile as the pieces fell into place. Thank you, Patricia, I began, my voice steady. Like many of you, I believe in the power of community. But unlike many of you, I've seen firsthand what happens when that community fails its most vulnerable members. I described the teens we served, their challenges, their resilience, their potential. I explained the gaps in our mental health systems and how grassroots initiatives like ours filled critical needs. Some well-meaning people, I said, my gaze briefly meeting Diane's, believe that impact requires institutional structures and traditional power. They say things like, "You're too smart to waste your life on charity work." A few knowing chuckles rippled through the audience. Diane's words, masked as general commentary, hung in the air between us. But transformative change often happens at the margins, where people have been overlooked and underestimated. I continued, sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is listen to voices that have gone unheard. My final slide displayed our impact metrics, the numbers that spoke louder than any words. 247 teens served, 86% reporting improved mental health, 63% better school attendance, 5 attempts prevented. Below those numbers was a comparison chart showing how voices unheard had surpassed the outreach goals of several established programs, including the Davidson Foundation, Diane's pet project for the past 5 years. This is what becomes possible, I concluded, when we value substance over status, impact over institutions, and courage over comfort. Thank you. The applause was immediate and thunderous. People rose to their feet, first Patricia, then Robert, then dozens more. Ethan stood too, clapping with unabashed pride. Only Diane remained seated, her composure impeccable, but her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. As I returned to our table, several people stopped me with business cards, donation pledges, offers of support. A state representative asked for a meeting. A foundation director wanted to discuss expansion funding. By the time I reached Diane, her public mask was firmly back in place, but something had fundamentally shifted between us. For the first time, she was looking at me, truly seeing me, not as Ethan's unsuitable wife or her social obligation, but as someone who had outmaneuvered her on her own carefully curated stage. "Quite the surprise, Maya," she said evenly. "You might have mentioned you were speaking." I met her gaze directly. "I thought you appreciated strategic thinking, Diane." For just a moment, something like respect flickered in her eyes. "Well," she said finally, "you certainly know how to make an entrance." It wasn't an apology, it wasn't even an acknowledgement of what she'd done. But as the evening continued, I realized I no longer needed either from her. I had found my voice, and now, finally, she had heard it. She didn't apologize, she just started asking for advice. 2 weeks after the gala, a text message from Diane appeared on my phone. "Lunch tomorrow, Blackbird Cafe at..." No explanation, no pleasantries. Classic Diane. I showed Ethan the message that evening. He looked as confused as I felt. "She never asks anyone to lunch without an agenda," he said, frowning at the screen. "Especially not at Blackbird. That's where she takes people she wants to impress." "Should I be worried?" I asked. Ethan considered it. "Maybe. But she's not the type to make a scene in public." He hesitated. "Do you want me to come with you?" I shook my head. "No. Whatever this is, I need to handle it myself." The next day, I arrived at Blackbird Cafe 5 minutes early, dressed in a simple but professional outfit. The hostess led me to a quiet corner table where Diane was already seated, reviewing something on her tablet with intense focus. "Maya," she said, looking up. "No air kiss, no social performance. Thank you for coming." "Of course," I replied, sitting across from her. "Is everything all right?" Diane set her tablet aside. "Patricia Winters has been singularly impressed with your work. She's told every partner at the firm about you." "Not what I'd expected." "That's very kind of her." "It wasn't kindness," Diane replied with characteristic bluntness. "It was a pointed message, to me." I waited, letting the silence do its work. "Patricia made it clear that I should have recognized your potential sooner," Diane continued. "She rarely issues direct rebukes, but when she does, she trailed off, taking a sip of her sparkling water. The waiter appeared. I ordered a salad I didn't want. Diane requested her usual salmon, no sauce, extra vegetables. When he departed, she folded her hands on the table. "I was wrong about your work," she said simply. I blinked, momentarily speechless. "I believed community mental health was inefficient, unsustainable," she continued. "I thought I was guiding you toward bigger impact. By actively sabotaging my clinic, I couldn't keep the edge from my voice." That was... For the first time, Diane looked uncomfortable, excessive, and ultimately counterproductive. Coming from Diane, this was practically a tearful confession on bended knee. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Because your speech at the gala demonstrated something I respect. She met my eyes directly. Strategic thinking, resilience, the ability to build something meaningful without institutional support. I almost laughed. Those were the very qualities you were trying to destroy. I wasn't trying to destroy anything, Diane corrected. I was attempting to redirect your talents. I simply miscalculated. The waiter returned with our meals. I pushed lettuce around my plate, processing her words. If you're expecting me to thank you, I said finally, for forcing me to create voices unheard. I'm not, she interrupted. I'm acknowledging that you've built something significant, despite my interference. Her voice lowered, something I would have supported from the beginning had I bothered to actually understand your work. Coming from anyone else, it would have been insufficient. But from Diane Harrington, this was seismic. We ate in silence for a few minutes before she spoke again. I have a contact at the Lakeview Foundation in Washington, she said casually. They fund trauma-focused initiatives. Sarah Jacobs, we were at Yale together. She's mentioned they're looking to expand their portfolio in Boston. I set down my fork. Are you offering to make an introduction? Only if you're interested, Diane replied. But she specifically mentioned wanting to fund grassroots programs with proven outcomes. It was happening exactly as I'd imagined during those late nights, planning Voices Unheard, Diane offering her connections, trying to insert herself into my success. The difference was that now, I didn't need her help. But I didn't need her as an enemy either. I'd appreciate the introduction, I said carefully. Though I should mention we've already applied for their Community Partners grant. Surprise flickered across her face. You have connections at Lakeview? I have results, I corrected. Sometimes that's enough. Diane nodded slowly. Over the next hour, she mentioned 3 more foundations, a potential corporate sponsor, and a grant-writing intern from her firm who was exceptional with data visualization. I accepted some offers, declined others. By dessert, which she surprisingly ordered, our conversation had shifted into something almost collaborative. When the check came, she reached for it automatically. I've got this, I said, placing my card down first. Diane raised an eyebrow but didn't object. A small concession that spoke volumes. That evening, I told Ethan everything. She didn't actually apologize, he noted, looking troubled. No, I agreed, but she acknowledged she was wrong. For Diane, that's revolutionary. Are you going to trust her? He asked. I considered the question. Trust isn't binary. I believe she genuinely respects what I've built now. I believe she'll follow through on the introductions. But I'll verify everything and keep my guard up. Ethan smiled, a mixture of pride and relief in his eyes. You know, watching you stand up to her, watching you build something she couldn't tear down, it's helped me see some things more clearly. Like what? Like who you really are, he said quietly. And maybe who I want to be. In the months that followed, everything shifted. The clinic received new funding, some through Diane's connections, but most through our own efforts. Voices Unheard expanded to 12 locations across 3 cities. I hired a dedicated staff, including Zoe, who had become a certified peer support specialist. Diane maintained a respectful distance, forwarding relevant contacts but never trying to take credit. At family dinners, she asked thoughtful questions about our programs instead of suggesting career alternatives. One Sunday afternoon, as we prepared to leave her house, she pulled me aside. I've recommended you for the Chadwick Foundation's Community Leadership Award, she said, straightening an already perfect flower arrangement. The nomination required personal testimony. I spoke quite highly of your work. Thank you, I said, genuinely surprised. You've earned it, she replied simply. As Ethan and I drove home, I thought about how far we'd come. I didn't want Diane's approval anymore. That mead had burned away in the fire of her betrayal, and my subsequent rebirth. What remained was something more valuable, mutual respect between 2 women who had underestimated each other. I had my clinic back. I had Voices Unheard thriving. I had a husband who finally saw me clearly, and I had the quiet satisfaction of knowing that Diane Harrington would never again mistake my compassion for weakness, or my community focus for lack of ambition. She hadn't apologized, but she had learned, and ultimately, that was enough.